Greetings on this Thursday, October the 17th, 2019. I'm Hugh Hewitt inside the Beltway in the ReliefFactor.com studio. I begin with sad news that Representative Elijah Cummings, a fierce partisan Democrat, but a grand old man of Congress, has passed away at Johns Hopkins University from cancer. It was long expected. He'd been sick for a long time, but very, very sad. He was a fixture when the Democrats would come out and beat up on the Republicans, and that's fine. I mean, that's how the House is supposed to be. It's a democracy. You got Nancy Pelosi yelling at Donald Trump yesterday and Donald Trump taunting her on Twitter. And it's just the rollicking roller coaster of American freedom and busting out the punching bag and getting it on each other's case. Elijah Cummings, always a brawler, and good for all of them to throw their swings and do so transparently instead of smiling like a party platform Politburo getting together and talking everything is fine. Speaking of which, by the way, today in downtown D.C. inside the Beltway, the Nixon Foundation, of which I'm the president, and the Wilson Center, Bipartisan Policy Organization, is going to spend all day talking about China. Now, it's sold out, so you have to go to Nixon Foundation online if you want to watch it, but it's all China all the time, and we're making up for what the Democrats did not mention China once in 3-hour debate on Tuesday night. Unbelievable. Biggest national security challenge, how to get along with China, how to do it strategically. That is coming up today, and you can watch it either the Wilson Center's webcast or the Nixon Foundation all day long. Other headlines: hasty U.S. pullback, a seismic shift for Middle East. I disagree. I've been telling you why. I never thought those were defensible lines, but I think we got to stay in Iraq. Trump strikes back at criticism over the Syria move. He was swinging wildly, according to the Democrats. According to Trump, the Democrats staged the whole thing yesterday, the big meltdown. Biggest news of all, Leader McConnell told his Senate GOP caucus, we're going to do impeachment trial in about 6 days around Thanksgiving. So he's just moving through it like Mitch. It's completely political. He's simply not going to be ruffled by this. It's not going to work. And the Democrats will then mutter about the impeachment, and I think they are stepping in it, but lots more ahead of that. I'm going to focus this hour on something unusual, something that happened at Notre Dame University on Saturday, and it wasn't their crushing of USC. It was the fact that the Attorney General of the United States went to Notre Dame and gave a speech which every American ought to hear, and that's why I'm going to play the whole thing this hour and next. Bill Barr talking about religious liberty, and that is so important. It's important because I'm a person of faith. You know, I'm an evangelical Roman Catholic Presbyterian. I go to Mass on Saturday night, and I go to the Presbyterian Church on Sunday. I go to a Bible study. I believe in my faith. I am not ashamed of the gospel, but I know that for the last 15 years, it has been under attack in the public square by secular absolutists at every turn. And this is the most important speech by a public figure on religious liberty in my life, is the one that Attorney General Barr gave on Saturday. I finally got the tape of it, and I want you to hear it. And while you're listening to it, if you were inspired by him, go over to HughHewitt.com and contribute to Alliance Defending Freedom. It's coincident with my campaign to raise money for Alliance Defending Freedom. The banner is at the top of HughHewitt.com. If you hear anything you agree with, go over there and click and send $10 or $50 or $100 or $1,000. Alliance Defending Freedom is working for everyone out there. Their phone number is 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060. Here is Attorney General Barr at the beginning of his speech in Notre Dame, cut number 1.
I'd like to thank Tony DeNicola, whose generous support has shaped and continues to shape countless minds through examination of the Catholic moral and intellectual tradition. When my daughter Meg, after she graduated and ultimately went to law school, she became very ill for a period of time, and I knew there were great kids at Notre Dame, people of great character, and for a long period of time, there was always one of her classmates visiting us. They worked it out, so there was always someone coming to visit us while she was being treated in the hospital and so forth. And we got very close to all her friends, and we loved them to death. And Notre Dame will always have a special place in my heart because of that. I have 5 grandchildren now with another on the way, and I'd be very proud if they all end up at Notre Dame. Meg, incidentally, recovered and got married recently. She got married on December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And the day before, I got a call from the president who was walking out to the helicopters, and he said, "Bill, I know we talked about putting the announcement off until after your daughter's wedding, but I'd sort of like to do it today if it's okay with you, but it's totally up to you." And I said, "Well, Mr. President, we talked about it, and whatever suits you, we'll adjust to. That'll be fine." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll do it now while I'm walking out to the helicopters." So I turned on I was, lounging around in my study at home, and I turned on the television. And it was sort of the first of a number of outer-body experiences I've had since then, because he walks over and he goes, "I'm selecting Bill Barr to be Attorney General of the United States." And that was the day before, that was Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, and the next day was my daughter's wedding, and she said to me, "Pop, you're the only guy I know who would upstage his daughter at her wedding." But when I gave the toast, I said, "Meg, it's okay, because just as the Barr name is going to be dragged through the mud, you're changing your name to McGaughey."
He kept going, then he got serious about what he was going to talk about. Cut number 2 of the Bill Barr speech Saturday at Notre Dame.
Today, I would like to share some thoughts with you about religious liberty in America. It's an important priority in this administration and for this Department of Justice. We've set up a task force within the department in which all the various components that have equities in this area, the Solicitor General's office, the Civil Division, the Office of Legal Counsel, and other offices are all represented. And we have regular meetings, and we keep an eye out for cases or events around the country where states are misapplying the Establishment Clause in a way that discriminates against people of faith, or cases where states adopt laws that impinge upon the free exercise of religion. From the founding era onward, there was strong consensus about the centrality of religious liberty in the United States. The imperative of protecting religious freedom was not just a nod in the direction of piety. It reflects the framers' belief that religion was indispensable to sustaining our free system of government. In his renowned 1785 pamphlet, Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments, James Madison described religious liberty as a right towards men, but a duty towards the Creator, and a duty precedent both in order of time and degree of obligation to the claims of civil society. It has been over 230 years since that small group of colonial lawyers led a revolution and launched what they viewed as a great experiment, establishing a society fundamentally different than anything that had come before. They crafted a magnificent charter of freedom, the United States Constitution, which provides for limited government while leaving the people broadly at liberty to pursue their lives both as individuals and through their free associations. This quantum leap in liberty has been the mainspring of unprecedented human progress, not only for Americans, but for people around the world.
A quantum leap in liberty. We'll come back and listen to a little bit more of this. Actually, we're going to listen to the whole speech. I'm making a command decision. I've got time to do it this hour. In the first segment of next hour, we're going to listen to the whole thing. Because I think if you know anything about religious liberty, you know it's under attack. You know, that's why I support Alliance Defending Freedom. It's why I raise money for them every October. It's why I urge you to head over to Alliance Defending Freedom banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. ADF is the #1 legal defense fund for religious liberty in the United States. You can call them at 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060. Go and do that today. Please don't wait another day, and go and help Alliance Defending Freedom when I come back. And Bill Barr has taken so many slings and arrows over this speech. I mean, really, slings and arrows over this speech you would not believe. Everyone calling him everything because he's out there talking about what most Americans take as a matter-of-fact statement that we are free and absolutely protected in our religious beliefs and our free exercise of those beliefs. God bless Bill Barr for standing up for this, and at Notre Dame for having him to do so. We'll play more of this important speech when we come back. We got Michael Oren calling in from Israel this morning, Admiral Stavridis, Dr. Larry Arnn. Lots ahead, but Bill Barr first on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Lethal Agent, a Mitch Rapp novel by Kyle Mills.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I am playing for you Admiral William Barr's amazing speech at Notre Dame over the weekend on Saturday. Here is cut number 3 talking about how religious liberty triumphed over communism in the 20th century.
In the 20th century, our form of free society faced a severe test. There's always been the question whether a democracy so solicitous of individual freedom could stand up against the regimented totalitarian state. That question was answered with a resounding yes, as the United States stood up against and defeated first fascism and then communism. But in the 21st century, we face an entirely different kind of challenge. The challenge we face is precisely what the Founding Fathers foresaw would be the supreme test of a free society. They never thought that the main danger to the Republic would come from external foes. The central question was whether, over the long haul, we the people could handle freedom. The question was whether the citizens in such a free society could maintain the moral discipline and virtue necessary for the survival of free institutions. By and large, the founding generation's view of human nature was drawn from the classical Christian tradition. These practical statesmen understood that individuals, while having the potential for great good, also had the capacity for great evil. Men are subject to powerful passions and appetites, and if unrestrained, are capable of ruthlessly riding roughshod over their neighbors and the community at large. No society can exist without some means of restraining individual rapacity. But if you rely on the coercive power of the government to impose those restraints, the framers believed, this would inevitably lead to a government that is too controlling, and you would end up with no liberty, just tyranny. On the other hand, unless you had some effective restraint, you end up with something equally dangerous: licentiousness, the unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of the common good. This is just another form of tyranny, where the individual is enslaved by his appetites, and the possibility of any healthy community life crumbles. Edmund Burke summed up this point in his typically colorful language. Men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put chains upon their own appetites. Society cannot exist unless a controlling power be placed somewhere, and less of it there is within, the more of it there must be without.
He continued, cut number 4.
So the founders decided to take a gamble, and they called it a great experiment. They would leave the people broad liberty, they would limit the coercive power of the government, and they would place their trust in the self-discipline and virtue of the American people. In the words of Madison, we have staked our future on the ability of each of us to govern ourselves. And this is really what they meant by self-government. It did not mean primarily the mechanics by which we select a representative legislature. It referred to the capacity of each individual to restrain and govern themselves. But what was the source of this internal controlling power? In a free republic, those restraints could not be handed down from above by philosopher kings. Instead, social order must flow up from the people themselves, freely obeying the dictates of inwardly possessed and commonly shared moral values. and to control willful human beings with an infinite capacity to rationalize, those moral values must rest on authority independent of men's wills.
That's it.
They must flow from the
independent of men's wills. It's like the key line: authority independent of men's will. Where does that come from? It can come from the Constitution, but the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are inevitably linked to religious liberty. Support religious liberty by giving to Alliance Defending Freedom. The banner is over at HughHewitt.com. More of Attorney General Barr's talk after the break. During the break, you can call 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060 to help Alliance Defending Freedom keep winning battles for you. Support Bill Barr, Alliance Defending Freedom. I'll be right back on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Elijah Cummings has died. Vice President Pence, Mike Pompeo are in Ankara, Turkey, along with National Security Advisor O'Brien to negotiate with Turkey. And we note as well that Brexit has been negotiated. There is a deal. Boris Johnson has done it. We will learn more about that on Saturday if the British Parliament votes for it. But let's go from the breaking news to Bill Barr speaking at Notre Dame on Saturday in a speech that everyone in America simply needs to hear. He's talking about religious liberty. And I remind you, Alliance Defending Freedom banner is over at HughHewitt.com. That's what he's talking about. Go support them during this speech. Cut number 5.
Well, how does religion promote moral discipline and the virtue needed to sustain free government? Well, first, it gives us rules to live by. The founding generation were Christians, and they believed that the Judeo-Christian moral system corresponds to the true nature of man. And those rules speak to man and fulfill man both in his private spiritual life and in his communal life. Those moral precepts start, of course, in Christianity with the 2 great commandments, to love God with your whole heart, soul, and mind, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. But they also include the guidance of natural law, a real transcendent moral order which flows from God's eternal law, the divine wisdom by which the whole of creation is ordered. The eternal law is impressed upon and reflected in all created things. And from the nature of things we can, through reason and experience, discern standards of right and wrong that exist independent of human will. Now, modern secularists dismiss this idea of morality as sort of otherworldly superstition imposed by a killjoy clergy. But in fact, Judeo-Christian moral standards are the ultimate utilitarian rules for human conduct. They reflect the rules that are best for man, not in the by and by, but in the here and now. They are like God's instruction manual for the best running of man and the best operation of human society. And by the same token, violations of these moral laws have bad real-world consequences for man and for society. We may not pay the price immediately, but over time, the harm is real. Religion also helps promote moral discipline within society. We're all fallen. We don't automatically conform our conduct to moral rules, even when we know that they are good for us. But religion helps teach, train, and habituate people to want what is good. It does not do this primarily by formal laws, that is, by coercive power. It does this through moral education and by framing society's informal rules, the customs and traditions which reflect the wisdom and experience of the ages. In other words, religion helps frame a moral culture within society that instills and reinforces moral discipline.
He went on to then talk about how religion has been under attack for a half century. Cut number 6.
I think we all recognize, that over the past 50 years, religion has been under increasing attack. On the one hand, we have seen the steady erosion of our traditional Judeo-Christian moral system and a comprehensive effort to drive it from the public square. On the other hand, we see the growing ascendancy of secularism and the doctrine of moral relativism. By any honest assessment, the consequences of this moral upheaval have been grim. Virtually every measure of social pathology continues to gain ground. In 1965, the illegitimacy rate was 8%. The last time I was Attorney General, in 1992, it was at 25%. Today, it is at over 40%, and that's the national average. In many of our large urban areas, as we know, it is well over 70%. Along with the wreckage of the family, we are seeing record levels of depression and mental illness, dispirited young people, soaring suicide rates, increasing numbers of angry and alienated young males, an increase in senseless violence, and a deadly drug epidemic. As you know, over 70,000 people die a year from drug overdoses. That is more casualties in a year than we experienced during the entire Vietnam War. I won't dwell on the bitter results of the new secular age. Suffice it to say that the campaign to destroy the traditional moral order has coincided, and I believe has brought with it immense suffering and misery. And yet the forces of secularism, ignoring these tragic results, press on with even greater militancy.
They do, and he talks, where is the progress the progressives promise? Cut number 7 of Bill Barr.
Among the militant secularists are many so-called progressives. But where is the progress? We are told we are living in a post-Christian era. But what has replaced the Judeo-Christian moral system? What is it that can fill the spiritual void in the hearts of the individual person? And what is the system of values that can sustain human social life? The fact is that no secular creed has emerged capable of performing the role of religion. Scholarship suggests that religion has been integral to the development and thriving of Homo sapiens since we emerged roughly 50,000 years ago. And it is just for the past few hundred years that we've embarked on this experiment of living without religion. We hear much today about our humane values, but in the final analysis, what undergirds these values? What commands our adherence to them? What we call values today is really nothing more than mere sentimentality, still drawing on the vapor trails of Christianity. Now, there have been times and places where the traditional moral order has been shaken in the past. In the past, societies like the human body seem to have a self-healing mechanism, a self-correcting mechanism that gets things back on course if things go too far. The consequences of moral chaos become too pressing. The opinion of decent people rebels. They coalesce and rally against obvious excess. Periods of moral retrenchment follow periods of excess. This is the idea of the pendulum. And we've all thought to ourselves, after a while, the pendulum will swing back. But today we face something different that may mean that we cannot count on the pendulum swinging back. First, is the force, fervor, and comprehensiveness of the assault on organized religion we are experiencing today. This is not decay. This is organized destruction. Secularists and their allies have marshaled all the forces of mass communication, popular culture, the entertainment industry, and academia in an unremitting assault on religion and traditional values. These instruments are used not only to affirmatively promote secular orthodoxy, but also to drown out and silence opposing voices and to attack viciously and hold up to ridicule any dissidents.
Went on to say then, the irony is that secularism dominates everything. Cut number 8, the most important cut.
One of the ironies, as some have observed, is that the secular project has itself become a religion pursued with religious fervor. It is taking on all the trappings of religion, including inquisitions and excommunication. Those who defy the creed risk a figurative burning at the stake, social, educational, and professional ostracism and exclusion waged through lawsuits and savage social media campaigns. The pervasiveness and the power of our high-tech popular culture fuels apostasy in other ways. It provides an unprecedented degree of distraction. Part of the human condition has been that there usually has been no way to avoid the big questions that stare us in the face. Are we created, or are we purely material accidents? Does our life have any meaning or purpose? But as Blaise Pascal observed, instead of grappling with these questions, many human beings are easily distracted from thinking about the final things. And indeed, we now live in the age of distraction, where we can envelop ourselves in a world of digital stimulation and universal connectivity. And we have almost limitless ways of indulging all our physical appetites. There's another modern phenomenon that is suppressing society's self-corrective mechanism that's making it harder for us to restore ourselves. In the past, when societies are threatened by moral chaos, the overall social costs of licentiousness and irresponsible personal conduct become so high that society ultimately recoils and reevaluates the path it is on. But today, in the face of all the increasing pathologies, instead of addressing the underlying cause, we have cast the state in the role of the alleviator of bad consequences. We call on the state to mitigate the social costs of personal misconduct and irresponsibility. So the reaction to growing illegitimacy is not sexual responsibility, but abortion. The reaction to drug addiction is safe injection sites. The solution to the breakdown of the family is for the state to set itself up as an ersatz husband for the single mother and an ersatz father for the children. The call comes for more and more social programs to deal with this wreckage. And while we think we're solving problems, we are underwriting them.
He goes on. Let me play just a little bit more, because this is so important. We'll crest into the next hour and finish it in the third hour. Cut number 9.
We start with an untrammeled freedom, and we end up as dependents of a coercive state on whom we depend. Interestingly, this idea of the state as the alleviator of bad consequences has given rise to a new moral system that goes hand in hand with the secularization of society. It can be called a system of macro-morality, and in some ways it is an inversion of Christian morality. Christianity teaches a micro-morality. We transform the world by focusing on our own personal morality and transformation. The new secular religion teaches macro-morality. One's morality is not gauged by their private conduct, but rather their commitment to political causes and collective action to address various social problems. This system allows us not to worry so much about the strictures on our own private lives, because we can find salvation on the picket line.
Hold it right there. We can find salvation on the picket line. We can't, of course. You can't find salvation on the picket line. I'm going to play two more cuts of Attorney General Barr and then conclude it in the first segment of next hour. Important speech, very important speech. Send it everywhere. You can get the podcast at HughHewitt.com. Join the universe to get it without commercials. I'll be right back. America, don't go anywhere. It's Thursday morning. I'm Hugh Hewitt.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds.
Non-denominational Christian school. The Montana
Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt on this Thursday morning. Elijah Cummings, who has passed, celebrating the new Brexit deal Boris Johnson has delivered, and generally saying, you've got to listen to this William Barr speech, and I'll continue and conclude it in the first segment of next hour. He was at Notre Dame on Saturday. Let's go back to it.
finely tuned moral sensibilities by participating in demonstrations on this cause or on that. Something happened recently that crystallized this difference between these competing moral systems. I was attending Mass at a parish I did not usually attend in Washington, D.C. And at the end of Mass, the chairman of the Social Justice Committee got up to give his report to the parish. And he pointed to the growing homeless problem in D.C. and explained that more mobile soup kitchens were needed to feed them. This being a Catholic church, I expected him to call for volunteers to go out and provide for this need as volunteers. But instead, he recounted all the visits that the committee members had made to the D.C. government to lobby for higher taxes and more spending to fund mobile soup kitchens. A third phenomenon which makes it difficult for the pendulum to swing back is the way the law is being used as a battering ram to break down traditional moral values and to establish moral relativism as the new orthodoxy. Law is being used in a couple of ways. First, either through legislation, but more frequently through judicial interpretation, the forces of secularism have been continually seeking to eliminate laws that reflect traditional moral norms. At first, this involved rolling back laws that prohibited certain kinds of conduct, hence the watershed decision legalizing abortion, and since then the legalization of euthanasia, and the list goes on, as we all know. More recently, we have seen the law used aggressively to force religious people and entities to subscribe to practices and policies that are antithetical to their faith. The problem is not that religion is being forced on others. The problem is that irreligion is being forced. Secular values are being forced on people of faith.
Exactly right. Final cut for this hour. Number 10, Bill Barr at Notre Dame on Saturday.
This reminds me of the way Roman emperors just couldn't leave the minority of Christians in the empire alone, although they were loyal to the emperor. They couldn't leave them in peace. They would mandate that they had to violate their conscience by offering religious sacrifice to the emperor as a god. Similarly today, militant secularists do not have a live and let live spirit. They are not content to leave religious people alone to practice their faith. Instead, they seem to take delight in compelling people to violate their conscience. For example, the last administration sought to force religious employers, including Catholic religious orders, to violate their sincerely held religious views by funding contraceptive and abortifacient coverage in their health plans. And similarly, recently, California has sought to require pro-life pregnancy centers to provide notices of abortion rights. This refusal to accommodate the free exercise of religion is relatively recent. Just 25 years ago, there was a broad consensus in our society that our laws should accommodate religious belief. In 1993, Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The purpose of the statute was to promote maximum accommodation to religion when the government adopted broad policies that might impinge on religious practice. And at the time, this was not controversial. It was introduced by Chuck Schumer with 170 co-sponsors in the House, and was introduced by Ted Kennedy and Oren with 59 co-sponsors in the Senate, and it passed the Senate by 97-3. But recently, as the process of secularization has accelerated, this statute has come under assault, and the idea of religious accommodation is falling out of favor. Because this administration firmly supports accommodation of religion, the battleground at this time has largely shifted to the states. Some state governments are now attempting to compel religious individuals and entities to subscribe to practices or to espouse viewpoints that are incompatible with their religion. Ground zero for these attacks on religion are the schools, and to me, this is the most serious challenge to religious liberty today. For anyone who has a religious faith, by far the most important part of exercising that faith is teaching that religion to your children, the passing on of the faith. There is no greater gift we can give our children and no greater expression of love. And for the government to interfere in that process is a monstrous invasion of religious liberty.
A monstrous invasion of religious liberty. To prevent that, keep listening. I'll play the conclusion of the Barr speech at the top of the second hour of today's Thursday show. I remind you that Alliance Defending Freedom does this every day, everywhere in every state. You can go support them over at hughhewitt.com. The banner Alliance Defending Freedom is at the top. You can call right now, 866-700-1060. Big day. Brexit is back. Boris Johnson wins. And I will tell you about that and talk with Stavridis and Michael Oren and Jim Talent in the next hour, Larry Arnn in the third, as we return to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Many states are adopting
on the Salem Radio Network. Returns from break in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings, everyone listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show. It is, of course, Thursday. It's a sad Thursday. Elijah Cummings has passed away, ranking Democrat, chair of the House Oversight Committee, and you'll be hearing about him throughout the day, but I bring you that news this morning. Last hour, I have been playing, and I want you to hear the conclusion of a speech that William Barr gave last week at Notre Dame University. The Attorney General of the United States went there to talk about religious liberty. Of course, right now I'm raising money for Alliance Defending Freedom. The banner is over at hughhewitt.com. It's absolutely crucial that we keep ADF in the field, that we keep them fully funded, and you can do so by calling right now 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060. But Bill Barr's speech is a turning point for clarity about the threat in America to people of faith. So I want you to hear the end of it. Cut number 11, Attorney General Barr at Notre Dame last week.
Yet, this is where the battle is being joined, and I see that is being waged on three fronts. The first front relates to the content of public school curriculum. Many states are adopting curriculum that is incompatible with traditional Judeo-Christian principles, according to which parents are attempting to raise their children. And they often do this without any opt-out provision for religious families. Thus, for example, New Jersey recently passed a law requiring public schools to adopt an LGBT curriculum that many feel is inconsistent with traditional Christian teaching. Similar laws have been passed in California and Illinois. And the Orange County Board of Education in California issued an opinion that, quote, parents who disagree with the instructional material related to gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation may not excuse their children from this instruction. Indeed, in some cases, the schools may not even warn parents about the lessons they plan to teach on controversial subjects relating to sexual behavior and relationships. This puts parents who dissent from the secular orthodoxy to a difficult choice. Try to scrape together enough money to send their kids to private school or homeschooling, or allow their children to be inculcated with messages that they fundamentally reject. The second axis of attack in the realm of education are state policies designed to starve religious schools of generally available funds and encouraging students to choose secular options rather than religious schools. Montana, for example, created a program that provided tax credits to those who donated to a scholarship program that underprivileged students could use to attend private schools. The point of the program was to provide a greater parental and student choice in education and to provide better education to needy youth. But Montana expressly excluded religious-affiliated private schools from the program. And when that exclusion was challenged in courts by parents who wanted to use the scholarship to attend a non-denominational Christian school, the Montana Supreme Court required the state to eliminate the entire program, rather than to allow parents to use the scholarships for religious schools. It justified this action by pointing to a provision in the Montana Constitution commonly referred to as the Blaine Amendment. Blaine amendments, as many of you know, were passed at a time of rampant anti-Catholic animus in this country and typically disqualify religious institutions from receiving any direct or indirect payment from state funds.
Yeah, he went on then, though. He was talking there about all private schools. He went on to focus on the attack on Catholic schools in particular. Cut number 12, Attorney General Barr's Saturday speech at Notre Dame University.
Finally, the third kind of assault on religious freedom in education have been recent efforts to use state laws to force religious schools to adhere to secular orthodoxy. For example, right here in Indiana, a teacher sued the Catholic Archbishop of Indianapolis for directing the Catholic schools within his diocese that they could not employ teachers in same-sex marriages because the example of those same-sex marriages would undermine the school's teaching on the Catholic view of marriage and the complementarity of the sexes. This lawsuit clearly infringes on the First Amendment rights of the Archdiocese by interfering both with its expressive association and with its church autonomy. And the Department of Justice filed a statement of interest in the state court making these points, and we hope that the state court will soon dismiss this case. Taken together, these cases paint a disturbing picture. We see the state requiring local public schools to insert themselves into contentious social debates without regard to the religious views of their students or parents. In effect, these states are requiring local communities to make their public schools inhospitable to families with traditional religious values. Those families are implicitly told that they should conform or leave. At the same time, pressure is placed on religious schools to abandon their religious convictions. Simply because of their religious character, they are starved of funds. Students who would otherwise choose to attend them are told that they may only receive scholarships if they turn their sights elsewhere. And simultaneously, the religious schools are threatened in tort cases and undoubtedly will be threatened with the denial of accreditation if they adhere to their religious character. If these measures are successful, those with religious convictions will become still more marginalized.
And then he wraps up. This is William Barr, the Attorney General of the United States, speaking at Notre Dame. He concludes this way.
I do not mean to suggest that there is no hope for moral renewal in our country, but we cannot sit back and just hope that the pendulum is going to swing back toward sanity. As Catholics, we are committed to the Judeo-Christian values that have made this country great. And we know that the first thing we have to do to promote this renewal is to ensure that we are putting our principles into practice in our own personal lives. We understand that only by transforming ourselves will we transform the world beyond ourselves. This is tough work. It's hard to resist the constant seductions of contemporary society. And this is where we need the grace and prayer and the help of the Church. Beyond this, we must place greater emphasis on the moral education of our children. Education is not vocational training. It is leading our children to the recognition that there is truth and helping them develop the facility to discern and love the truth and the discipline to live by it. We cannot have a moral renaissance unless we succeed in passing to the next generation our faith and values in full vigor. The times are hostile to this. Public agencies, including public schools, are becoming secularized and increasingly actively promoting moral relativism. If ever there was a need for a resurgence of Catholic education and more generally religiously affiliated schools, it is today. I think we should do all we can to promote and support authentic Catholic education at all levels. Finally, as lawyers, we should be particularly active in the struggle that is being waged against religion on the legal plane. We must be vigilant to resist efforts by forces of secularization to drive religious viewpoints from the public square and to impinge upon our exercise of our faith. I can assure you that as long as I am Attorney General, the Department of Justice will be at the forefront of this effort, ready to fight for the most cherished of all our American liberties, the freedom to live according to our faith. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today, and God bless you and Notre Dame.
I got to tell you, Barr was magnificent. I played the entire speech. I wanted you to hear it, and we cannot abandon the fight, and we have to help the fight. It's, Barr went out there, took a lot of courage to go to South Bend and give that speech, a lot of courage. He's taken a lot of heat from the left. He's been called every name in the book. He did it because it's important to protect religious liberty, the freedom of religious schools, to protect Catholic education, Protestant education, Jewish education, any kind of faith education. And you can help by helping the Alliance Defending Freedom today. The Alliance Defending Freedom did not ask for Bill Barr to help with their campaign, but he gave a speech that sure does underscore the stakes. And right now you can underscore your commitment by going to HughHewitt.com and hitting that ADF banner on the homepage at HughHewitt.com. It's right up there at the top. Or you can call 866-700-1060 and tell them, I'm with Barr. I'm with the Alliance Defending Freedom. I'm in favor of striking down that Montana law. I'm in favor of siding with the bishop. I'm in favor of every religious school in America. And we know that Alliance Defending Freedom has successfully defended them all over the country because the free exercise clause is very strong, but it takes lawyers. It takes lawyers, and lawyers take money. They do take every client for free, but they still got to pay their lawyers something. So that banner is at the top of HughHewitt.com, or you can call 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060. Make your contribution to ADF today. Come right back. Jim Talent of the Bipartisan Policy Center joins me next on this Thursday morning here on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. On a sad morning, even though he's a Democrat and a fierce partisan, Elijah Cummings served his country well for a long time. He passed away this morning. Senator Jim Talent joins me now, former senator from Missouri, also former member of the House, and I am certain he served with Elijah Cummings.
Yes, I did, and it is a sad day. A conscientious congressman who did his best according to his lights, and he's gone now. So we'll mourn that. They'll have a session in the House talking about him, which is a real time of bipartisan unity when they do that.
Now, did you lose members often when you were in Congress, Senator?
Not sitting members, but yeah, you do occasionally. And when that happens, they're generally speaking, the senior member of the state delegation will organize a special order, a time for people to go down and talk about the member who died. I remember we did that for Bill Emerson from Missouri, who was my closest friend, and it was very moving. And you find out a lot about people in that instance because their friends go down and talk about not just what they did, in the public square, but personally as well.
Now, Senator, all of your friends, turning from the sad news about Elijah Cummings to the news of what's going on. Mike Pompeo in Turkey today, heading over to Jerusalem thereafter. He's joined by the Vice President of the United States, the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, I believe the DepSec of Defense, John Root. I think basically half of our defense establishment is in Turkey today, trying to get our NATO ally, and I put that in quotes, to stop the invasion of the Kurdish portion of Syria. And I don't think they're going to be successful because Erdogan is enjoying enormous domestic support, which led him to threaten Trump 10 days ago that he was going to do this whether or not there were American soldiers there. What do you think is going to happen?
That's correct. I mean, we are continuing to use diplomatic and economic tools in an effort to accomplish our own objectives in northern Syria and protect the Kurds. I have never understood. In fact, I've got a column coming up when they get it up on National Review saying I don't understand this tremendous reaction that we've betrayed the Kurds. I think we did everything we could for them, short of sacrificing vital American interests in the region. We used every diplomatic tool, and of course, we're beginning to sanction Turkey now. We did everything basically short of going to armed conflict with Turkey, which is really kind of impossible given that they're a NATO ally and that we have an Air Force base in Turkey. And we're continuing to do that.
Do you think we need to get the nukes out of Turkey?
Well, I think we need to adjust our policy regarding Turkey in general, and that probably will include that. But I think we need a strategy because we have an ally who is consistently not acting like an ally, and it's a major problem. Now, you're right. I mean, Erdogan is doing this in part for domestic political reasons. There is a long history in Turkey, though, of really not wanting autonomous or semi-autonomous enclaves of, controlled by the Kurds around Turkey because they are afraid of the separatism will spread to Turkey itself. So it's also their perception of their national interest here.
Now, in terms of the reaction, I personally had a conversation last night with a senior defense official that I think the inevitability of a line of demarcation in northern Syria between Turkey on the one side, the Kurds, the Syrians under Assad, and the Russians on the other side is real, that it was going to happen, and that if we stand tall in Iraq, we can keep ISIS under the rock and in fear of their lives. And I'm not throwing my hands up. I think realism dictates that we were only in Syria because of ISIS and the failure of the Obama policy, and we were not prepared to garrison that state even with 100 troops or 5,000 troops or whatever it was forever.
Well, 100 troops is just, I also did not understand why people thought we ought to leave basically a few dozen special operators in a conflict zone where they weren't authorized to fight and didn't have the numbers to make a difference if they were. We'd just be exposing them to risk. we are dealing with the downstream here, of a decision that was made in the Obama administration that we were not going to attempt to influence events on the ground in Syria through military force. And so when you do that, and I did not criticize Obama at the time, I thought it was a plausible choice. But when you do that, it means that you are forfeiting influence to the countries that are willing to do that, which is what's happening in Syria.
Absolutely you are, and it always comes home. Jim Talent, always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter, @Jim Talent. Follow me to the next segment, America. Admiral Stavridis joins me next on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Lethal Agent, a Mitch Rapp novel by Kyle Mills.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in seconds.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt, part 2 of my 3-part interview with Admiral James Stavridis on his brand new book, Sailing True North, 10 Admirals and the Voyage of Character. Admiral Stav usually joins me each week to talk international affairs, but we're taking a bigger step back because this is a big, important book. Sailing True North in bookstores now at Amazon.com, at BarnesandNoble.com. It's everywhere, and I think it's everywhere applicable and useful to everyone. Good morning, Admiral. Thanks for being up early.
Hey, Hugh. Good to talk. What's up?
I want to talk about the 3 Brits. I said we were going to do 3 interviews on Sailing True North, and this I want to focus on Drake, Nelson, and Fisher. And I got to say, the least attractive character in all of Sailing True North is Drake. He's part pirate, part patriot, but a brutal man, right? A brutal man.
He is. He is particularly noted for the awful methods that he uses. He's effectively a privateer. He receives a letter of marque from the Queen, and so he's sailing under not exactly pirate colors, but he takes profit every time he takes a Spanish galleon. When he burns a city or takes a ransom, he takes profit from it. It's just a very different model, if you will, and he's striking a blow for the British Crown, of course, against the Spaniards. But on the other hand, he is taking money for doing so. And then secondly, his methodology is just brutal. He'll burn people alive. He'll kill them. He'll hang them. He is in the book, frankly, to show us that sometimes decisive, driven leaders can accomplish great results, but there are great moral costs associated with it.
I thought on page 67, when you talked about Drake as demonstrating how one builds up, quote, the habit of courage, was interesting. Even though he is a terrible human being, he was without question, without physical fear. It reminded me of MacArthur and a few other people out there. Yeah. And I gather you talk in terms of courage is something you develop day by day as you toured the Persian Gulf during the Tanker War. It's just something you have to learn.
It is. I suppose there are a few people who are wired in a way that it doesn't frighten them when missiles are flying at them or bullets are going overhead, but I'm certainly not one of those, and I think a very, very few human beings are. What can help you is being in the company of others who are more experienced. I remember as a very junior officer watching, for example, my commanding officer on a cruiser who was just so cool under fire and would often show up in the combat center of the ship and bring a few tasty things to eat that his wife had sent him, a tin of smoked oysters, and would literally be watching danger all around us and missiles flying, and he'd just very calmly move forward, take the threats as they came. You watch your seniors and you get better. And again, it's just experience. Think Stephen Crane, the Red Badge of Courage. Young man starts out, flees the scene of the battle. By the end of the book, he's found his place. He's found his footing. It happens.
Now, in True North, I was surprised to learn, because I've talked to you a number of times, but you have never told me, I had to read it, that Admiral Nelson is your quote, idol and hero, and that you have 12 biographies of him. I'm not surprised that he is a role model, but idol and hero is strong words, and therefore I read with great attention what someone who reads that deeply about him admires the most, and I think it's the fact that he paid attention to both peers and to subordinates, and that he simplified his command and control.
I think that sums him up very nicely. In an era in which British sea captains were known for laying on the lash and brutalizing the crew and just not caring about them, while as the commanding officer or the admiral in charge, they lived in relative luxury in the sea cabin at the back of the great sailing ships. Nelson deeply cared about his crews. He ensured they were fed properly. He got them medical treatment. He's famous for ensuring there were qualified physicians on his ships. He truly looked down the chain of command and recognized that your sailors, in the end, are those who are going to matter the most as battle turns. And then secondly, he was famous for working with his peers and building a band of brothers who could operate together under the most dangerous conditions. People love to be around Nelson. I'm certainly no Nelson, Hugh, but I tried hard to take care of my crews. And I always tried to focus on my peers, which I think in life in general, we spend a lot of time thinking about our boss, and most of us learn along the way to take care of those who are working for us. But you can learn so much from your peers, and Nelson did that very, very well.
There is an interesting paragraph or two about Captain Cuthbert, who is Nelson's lifelong friend, is buried near him. Who is James Stavridis' Captain Cuthbert?
Mine is a guy named Vice Admiral retired Michael Franken, who was my executive officer, second in command on my first command. So we were, in our mid-30s, commanding a destroyer. We were out there for a couple of years together. Just a wonderful young guy. Came off a farm in Iowa, and just had a sterling career in the Navy. Every time I needed some help, needed some advice, he was someone I could turn to, and he was with me in many different assignments along the path. Interestingly, yeah, wonderful.
One of my margin questions, when you talk about Horatio Nelson being injured, losing his arm, falling into a deep depression, PTS of the day, not recognized, and how did he recover from it? That might be applicable to people who suffer from it today.
I think it was PTSD, and in his case, it was particularly wrenching. He was not a large man. He's kind of another thing I identify with him. He's a small guy like me. He was about 5 feet, 5 inches, and lost his right arm, couldn't go into battle the way that he wanted to. He couldn't even write a decent letter. The way he recovered was, and there was certainly no network to bring him back, but first, it was that peer thing we talked about. His peers cared about him and stayed with him. So it's kind of what you invest in your peer network can be repaid to you in times like that. And secondly, just sheer desire to return to service for his country. So both external and internal aspects to his ultimate recovery. And he went on, of course, to become arguably, but I think truly the greatest admiral in history.
And a good lesson for our military, that a badly wounded military man can come back and serve again. Just a quick question. You reference Aubrey and Maturin, and we've talked about him before. Who do you prefer? I'm a Maturin guy. If you have to read about one of them, which one? You must be an Aubrey guy.
I am an Aubrey guy. So this, of course, Aubrey is the sea captain, and Stephen Maturin is his physician that sails with him in the marvelous series of books by Patrick O'Brien.
He's a civilian, and he doesn't know what he's doing on a ship, which is what I identify with.
Well, Aubrey is one who gets into trouble when he's ashore more often than not, and I suppose that's part of my problem on the shore side. So it would be a good match out there.
All right, now, I could talk to you we've got 2-3 minutes to talk about Jackie Fisher. I've only read Dreadnought before by Robert Massey. I found this fascinating, including, just an aside, at the age of 6 in 1847, the man who would become Admiral Jackie Fisher, Churchill's partner, Churchill's antagonist, was shipped alone at the age of 6 in 1847 from Ceylon to the United Kingdom. He never saw his parents again. Quote, "I have always had to fight like hell, and fighting like hell has made me what I am." What a magnificent character study in Sailing True North of Admiral Fisher.
Oh, I love him. And what you have to recognize also is the temporal aspect, the times. When he joins the Royal Navy, it's literally sailing ships and muzzle-loading cannons. By the end of his time in the Royal Navy, it's steel ships, it's diesel propulsion, it's torpedoes. Everything has changed. And he's been a driving force. By the time he's a one-star officer in the later 1800s, he is the driving force in changing the Royal Navy from what Winston Churchill referred to as they only had three traditions: rum, buggery, and the lash. Jackie Fisher was the one who wrenched the Royal Navy into the modern age and did it largely through sheer force of personality. Last thing, he was famous. Everywhere he went, he loved when the battle was over, when there was time, he would get his crews out, get a band out, and organize dancing.
There's a great paragraph on that, yeah.
Yeah, he's a marvelous figure. We don't have too many dancing admirals anymore, but you got to love Jackie Fisher.
Well, I love the fact, what you quote from his book, Memories, that he stressed emotion and earnestness. And let's close on this. Emotion meant energy, and I think this is an oft-overlooked quality in a leader. It sometimes surprises people when people have vast reservoirs of energy. I think it's kind of a party trick. They work on staying healthy, they work on getting their sleep, but they throw themselves into everything they do, and that energy impresses, inspires, motivates, and moves.
It does, and this was certainly the case for a Jackie Fisher. He was always seemed to be in motion. He was crackling with energy. He had lightning in his veins. And at the end of the day, you win some and you lose some with that approach, but he won more than he lost. He changed his institution, and he was a man for his times.
Sailing True North, those are the three Brits. We will talk about the Americans who get their chapters next week. Admiral Stavridis, I hope this is off to a good launch and you're enjoying Book Week. Sailing True North in bookstores everywhere and at Amazon.com. We'll continue our conversation next week. Thank you, Admiral.
Can't wait. Thanks so much, Hugh. Bye-bye.
Admiral Stavridis, always fun talking to. Let me do the pre-market report brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. I sent a note off to Andrew Del Rey yesterday, and I asked him, Andrew, how busy are you? And he just sent back a very cryptic note. We're swamped, and that means that these interest rates have done what they're supposed to do, triggered people's absolutely necessary look at whether or not they are saving money. And he sent me some emails that he got from a fellow who is saving $300 a month in their retirement. Didn't change anything in their loan, just lowered the rate, did a straight refi, $300 more a month every month in retirement because the mortgage has gone down. That's not a reverse mortgage, it's a refi. You got to check with AndrewandTodd.com. They are with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They lend you the money, or you can call them at 888-888-1172. What would you do with $300 more a month? If you have a mortgage, you owe it to yourself to ask them, what can I do to get more money in my pocket, spend less on a mortgage every single month? AndrewandTodd.com. AndrewandTodd.com. They're busy, but they'll be back to you, and the best way to get them back to you quickly is go online to AndrewandTodd.com, answer a couple of questions. Yes, you can call 888-888-1172. They will call you back if they don't answer right away. And 888-888-1172. A lot of people just like to deal on the phone, but the best thing to do to save time, AndrewandTodd.com. Market is all green this morning. Netflix came in last night with great earnings. Great earnings, all right? It's up $21 in the pre-market. Maybe it'll go up a little bit higher. Almost 7.5% rise overnight with their earnings coming in. They beat earnings even though they missed on subscription. And they talked candidly about the competition ahead from Disney and other, but when Netflix beats earnings, that means maybe the other tech companies are going to beat earnings, so expect a big day on the market. Boy, Netflix is huge. They got $5.24 billion in revenues, and they made $1.47 per share as opposed to $1.04. Good day for Netflix. Good day to go to AndrewandTodd.com. Good day to start ReliefFactor.com if you haven't already. I took it in the first hour, and I want to tell you, ReliefFactor.com works. I'm in conferencing all day. I love conferences. This one on China down at the Wilson Center in D.C., founded by the Nixon Foundation, the Wilson Center, this conference, the China Forum. means I'll be sitting in a chair all day long, but I'll be listening intently to the best speakers in the world on China. When you sit all day long, you know what happens. You're back. Not for me. ReliefFactor.com will keep those aches and pains away. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, the four little pills, that when you take, as I do every single morning, and I take them at 6:33 every single morning, then you will feel better, and you will do more, and you will go farther and faster, and you'll join the tens of thousands of people who took the advice of Pete and Seth Talbot, the founders of this amazing this product, and feel better. Coming up after the break, Michael Oren from Israel, the former Deputy Minister of Israel, former Ambassador of Israel to the United States, joins me for 3 big questions. You'll find out what those are after the break. Don't go anywhere, America. It is The Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt coming up. Dr. Larry Arnn, special Hillsdale Dialogue edition coming up next hour. Joined now from Israel by Dr. Michael Oren on this Thursday morning. Good morning, Michael. How are you?
I'm fine, Hugh. Good to be with you.
I have got 7 minutes, and I've got 3 questions for you. I'm about to go and moderate with Jane Harmon at the Wilson Center, a Nixon Foundation Wilson Center all-day forum on U.S.-China relations. And I want to know, number one, what is Israel up to with China? Number 2, what does Israel think of the mess in Syria the United States is in? And number 3, who's going to be your next prime minister? In 7 minutes, Michael Oren.
First of all, give my love to James. It's the best. One, China, we're kind of in a bind. Chinese are deeply interested in Israeli technology. Chinese today account for between 1/4 and 1/3 of all our foreign investment. And that does not please our number one ally, the United States of America, which fears the outflow of Israeli technology to China. It fears China making inroads in critical infrastructure within Israel. They're building our port in Haifa. They're building my subway across the street in Tel Aviv. So it puts us between a rock and a hard place, between economic interests and strategic interests. And we're going to have to navigate very, very carefully with regards to China.
Is Israel selling any defense technology to China?
Absolutely not. Under a 2006 agreement with the United States, we do not sell any military technology to China. We have to report semi-annually to the United States to that effect. And we honor it to the letter and beyond, I can tell you.
How about Israeli artificial intelligence technology that would be useful for facial surveillance and social control?
There is an issue, not just for facial recognition. Israeli intelligence technology is a world leader. And yes, there are issues involved with that as well. I'm not going to go into too much details, but the United States has expressed its concern / sometimes criticism of Israel and our policies.
All right, now on to number 2. The United States in Syria, its withdrawal has led to chaos. The Turkish invasion has led to chaos. What do you think?
Well, Secretary Pompeo is about to arrive in Israel today directly from Turkey to reassure Prime Minister Netanyahu about the situation, about the American fallout. It's going to be a hard sell. I think the Prime Minister is going to be looking for some very specific gestures on the part of the administration to reassure the Israeli people. Keep in mind, we see the Middle East from a Middle Eastern perspective. We see a United States who has rid Iran of its principal enemies in the Middle East, the Taliban, Saddam Hussein, and ISIS, at absolutely no cost to Iran, at trillions of dollars of cost to the American taxpayer. And then America pulls out, most recently from northern Syria, where, again, the Iranians and the Russians, and worse, the Turks, are pulling in. And so we're going to have to be reassured. I believe that one way we can be reassured is if the administration would make a public declaration that Israel's primary interests will be preserved in the event of any renewed negotiations between the United States and Iran, and that list should be published, Hugh, very much so. And specifics about American support for Israel, should Israel find itself at war with Iran, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, or with all the above at the same time.
All right, now we turn to my question every week. Who's going to be your prime minister? What's the deal as of today, Thursday, October the 20th?
And every week I have to say the 3 words which no guest on your show or any show ever wants to say. And those words are, I don't know.
I don't know.
Nobody knows. And nobody knows here. What we can know is that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to remain prime minister for as long as his court hearings proceed, because that gives him a special status in the Israeli judicial system. And there's more talk of national unity governments between the various parties. No party wants their responsibilities for a third and very unprecedented round of voting in this country. My guess is it'll come down to the wire, and somebody will blink.
Well, okay, when is the wire? When do we see the wire? What day is the wire?
Well, the wire officially would be 45 days after the Israeli elections, but we take off days for various Jewish holidays, and we've had a number of them recently. We're in the middle of one right now. So it's going to be in the coming weeks, and somebody's going to have to give on the national unity. And the national unity would be the questions of who is prime minister first in a rotation agreement, whether it's Netanyahu or Benny Gantz, the head of blue and white. What role does Avigdor Lieberman, the kingmaker in this whole situation, what role would he receive? And 2 major questions. Will the ultra-Orthodox agree to be enlisted in the army and give their kids basic Western education? And 2, what will happen if the prime minister is indicted?
All right, a bonus question. I was at dinner last night in advance of our all-day seminar today with 4 senior foreign policy people, one of whom is adamant that Israel and Iran are very close to a major, major conflict. We have a minute, Michael. How much credit do you give that assertion?
a significant amount of credit. I believe we are on the verge of a major confrontation with Iran and its proxies in the region. The American pullout from Syria has increased the chances of such a conflict because Iran feels that it has the upper hand now, and America's in retreat. The American president may be embroiled in an impeachment process. You remember what happened to Richard Nixon in 1973 and how a major war broke out then between Israel and its adversaries. So the stars seem to be aligning in that direction. Israel must be prepared, and that is why the Prime Minister should talk about this with the Secretary of State.
It's so good to hear from you again, Michael Oren. I always appreciate. Follow him on Twitter at Michael Oren. His website is Dr. Michael Oren, Dr. Michael Oren, Oren. Always a pleasure. Stay right where you are, America. Dr. Larry Arnn in for a special Hillsdale dialogue on Thursday as opposed to Friday right after this. Also, don't forget Alliance Defending Freedom. The banner is over at HughHewitt.com.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Glory America, bonjour, hi Canada. It's Thursday, and normally the Hillsdale Dialogue is Friday, but because of scheduling issues, Dr. Arnn has agreed to meet with me on a Thursday morning. It's like changing class schedule. It confuses all the students, and it's not to be undertaken lightly, because Steelers fans are going to wander in here and think that they're going to get Chuck Todd, and they're going to hear Larry Arnn. They're going to think that Chuck Todd has become Larry Arnn. It's going to confuse the heck out of them. Good morning, Dr. Arnn. How are you?
Lord, that's perished the thought. Chuck Todd and Larry Arnn changing places.
That's it. You are in Chuck Todd's spot right now, and so we can you give us your rundown on who your guests will be this weekend?
Yeah. It'll be some particular slime about going on in Washington, D.C.
Well, I want to begin. We're talking about the Odyssey, and I've got to tell you, Stephen Smith, who used to be a professor and was an amiable, fine guy, and then you made him a dean.
Yeah.
And so you promoted him to a bureaucracy.
Well,
but
he's still a professor, or else he would go completely to seed.
He did not go to seed last week. He was terrific. You have a hard act to follow. He knows and loves the Iliad in a way that I know you love, but I don't know if you know it as well as Stephen Smith.
No, I don't. No, hardly anybody does.
We'll work on that. We're going to begin, though. You sent me a clip, which I have not yet heard. We're going to play Boris. Where is this from, by the way?
It's on American television. He's being interviewed on a set with a woman interviewer, and he breaks into Greek. He breaks into the opening, and he goes on for a long time. You might not want to play it all, but he quotes from the beginning of the Iliad in Greek at length, and in a cadence that is like Homer's, and with real emphasis and facility. I mean, it's a tour de force.
Okay, cue it up. Boris Johnson on the Hillsdale Dialogue at the direction of Dr. Larry Arnn. Hit it.
Tough, and when they are, if they ever find themselves stranded in the bush, say in Arnhem Land, or in Kakadu with a crocodile at the foot of the mangrove, and they are up the mangrove, and the crocodile is at the foot, and there is absolutely nothing for it but to hang on, and all they can do is think of all the things that they can remember. You're telling me to shut up. I'm going to shut up in a minute. All they can do is keep themselves conscious by reciting all the poetry that they know. They will not do better than to preserve, to pickle, to conserve in their brains forever the greatest classics of every such as the Iliad. And that is what I do. When I'm in trouble, I recite to myself, Main Thea Peleia Jo Akileos, Ulomanein, Homoria Kaios Algiaseke, Palastifimus Psukas Aedi Proapsin, Hero, now Tuste Hiloria Teukikunesin, Oyonosi de Pasi, Diosti Teleto Bule. Exhude ta prota, dies tatene erisante, atredes hienaxandron kai dios, Achilles. Letus kai dios huios, hoga basilei colothes, nussonana straton orsticacain, ole conto de lae, hunecaton crucein, atimase naretera, atredes. Ho! Ga! Elste toase penea sacaion. Lussomenosti Trugatra, Peron Caparesia Poina, Skeptra Teconin Cursin, Hecibolo Apollonos. Atredes, Ticala Eucne Medis Acae, Lusaiti Moi, Philaden, Caiaglia Dexia Poina. Alu Catredes Agamemnon Henderisumo, Alla Cacosa Fee, Crataron de Fimuston Echele. Mesegeron, coilesenego paraneos kikeo, nun de thu nont e hustoron autiseonta, menu toi ukrais me, skeptron kai stemma se yoyo. Pendego, uluso, prin min, kai gera se pesen, hemetero en eoiko, in arge talos e patres. Histone poikomenen, kai emon lekos, ante osen. Ho, Zephas. Edai sen tageron, kai epaisito muso, Be dakeon parafina poloflu boyo salasas. Enth apaneusitheon polerto geraios. Apollonian actos ton eokmos tekileto. Cluthimoi argyrotox hos cluthen anthibebethas. Minthew. Kaitinidoyo itheanatoi. Tisayan danoi emadacro toisi belesin. And so on. I could go on.
Oh my gosh, Larry Arnn.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of Greek scholars who comment on this thing in YouTube. It's easy to find. And a couple of them fault him for missing a couple of lines. But everybody agrees it's awesome. And it's from the very beginning of the book. I'll read the first few lines that he read in Greek. Sing of wrath, goddess, the deadly wrath of Peleus, the son Achilles, that brought sufferings by the thousands down on the Achaeans and hurled so many sturdy souls to the realm of Hades, souls of splendid warriors, while they themselves were left for dogs and all manner of carrion birds to feast on, as the will of Zeus went driving toward its goal. Start your song from the moment when the first two stood face to face in open strife, Agamemnon, lord of men, and godlike Achilles. So that's he went to Eton and to Oxford, and they must have made it. He must have been a very good Greek scholar, because that's impressive.
Yeah, Dr. Arnn, I want to pause here for two things. One, the YouGov survey that came out yesterday shows the conservatives with 37% of the vote, Labor 22%, the Liberal Democrats 18%, the Brexit Party at 11%, and the Green 5%. If he delivers Brexit, Boris Johnson will win a crushing victory at the next polls, because this will just go up if he delivers Brexit. And I'm beginning to think that his wonderful, winsome buffoonishness has hidden a massive intellect, because you can't do that without a brain.
Yeah, and I agree. And there's another evidence of it available to people who don't read Greek. He's confident in the middle of all this mess. In other words, he's got the mind to see his way through it. And you know, it's an enormous achievement. It's very like, well, I'm not going to call him Abraham Lincoln, but Lincoln's achievement was to focus the issues of the Civil War down to the issue of slavery in comparison to the commands of the Declaration of Independence. And that, he had to sort through a million contrary opinions and strains and arguments and interpretations of the meaning of the conflict, both before and after and during and after the war. And he made it simple. Well, Boris Johnson he's got one simple point. More people have voted for this thing to leave the European Union than have ever voted for anything in Great Britain. And if we don't do it, it raises the question, who rules? And I think he's winning on that. And I think I think that it's a great sign, because the thing is, the European Union is a bureaucratic management society, and it's to manage everything, right? And its system of accountability to the people is so weak as to be almost non-existent. And so they think, you know, it'll hurt the economy, we won't be able to manage, and all that stuff. But it does come down to a simple thing. Do you have the right to consent to the government over you? And he's just brilliant on that point.
2 nights ago, Democrats gathered on a stage in Columbus, Ohio, and debated for 3 hours. I don't think any of them could remotely approach Boris Johnson in capacity. Maybe Pete Buttigieg, himself a Rhodes Scholar and no small intellect, but this is a sort of training that is not generally available anymore, is it?
Yeah, and think if you caught the introduction to that, he's asked a question about what do you do in times of trouble, and he imagined some boys caught up in a tree having to stay awake because there's something that'll eat them if they fall out, and so what they do is recite poetry to keep awake and to keep their souls stirred up. Right? This, he says, is what I do.
Wow. When we come back, we're going to talk about what Churchill did when he got thrown into the mine or hid in the mine, because memorization, there's an interesting aspect of Joseph Sack's introduction to the Iliad that goes along with the memorization moment that Boris Johnson just put on display. As we talk about the Iliad with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale are found at hillsdale.edu. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is on Thursday today, not Friday. Thank you, Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, for indulging that schedule change. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All of our conversations dating back to 2013 are found at hughforhillsdale.com, but all of the wonderful online courses are available at hillsdale.edu, and you can sign up for the free speech digest once a month. Old-fashioned snail mail. Imprimis will come to you. I'm sure it will have Justice Clarence Thomas Chapel dedication talk in it soon, if it isn't already in it already. Am I right about that, Dr. Arnn?
Watch it.
Okay, watch it. That's a good injunction. Now, when we went to break, I just played Boris Johnson's clip that you sent us memorizing. It reminded me that Winston Churchill, I think, I'm doing this from memory, found himself hiding in a mine during the Boer War and reciting memorization. Am I right about that?
Yeah, he had a tremendous reservoir of things that he memorized. He had a really great memory, and he focused on beautiful things. And so, yeah, he's a famous story about him as a scholar. He was a scholar of mixed result, but he astonished them at Harrow in a recitation contest because he recited from the lays of Macaulay all around, and for pages, the story of Horatius at the Gate. And it just was, it just wowed him. And, Adonn got up and walked over to the bookshelf and got the book and found the place and started following along. And people were looking at him, and he nodded his head. Yes, he's saying this right.
Did Lincoln have that capacity?
Oh, yeah. Lincoln, Lincoln, it was a common thing. Lincoln and Churchill both had Macbeth basically memorized. And there are stories of Lincoln. In Lincoln's day, Shakespeare is sort of codified now. The text has settled down, and it's sort of known. There's a settled, and there are small differences in the various versions that got around, because if you just think about when Shakespeare wrote and the time that passed, and printing was, more challenging back then. Anyway, Lincoln knew the various editions, and he would go to performances, and then he would get into conversations 2 or 3 times with people in the White House, and he would say, well, I like this, and he would go get some page and say, this is better, and he'd go get another and read the same thing in another. This is more true, he would say. And he was a critic of the performances, and, big memory. And,
now, that raises the question, which is tied into Joseph Sachs' introduction. Why memorize?
Well, because anything you memorize, you always have with you, and you will find that you will come to understand it better over time. I mean, first of all, it can inspire you in a hard moment, but also the things that you know that you can remember. Those are the things that will come to you, and you'll just find over the years, if you keep the memory alive, that those are the things you really understand. And you've thought about them from 18 different directions over time, and there's a great pleasure in that, and there's a great depth of understanding in that. That's why you do it.
Now, we have left behind the practice of obliging young people to memorize. I think the night before Christmas is the last thing I memorized. I used to know a few speeches for speech and debate in high school 40 years ago. What happened in American education that we abandoned that?
Well, we think it's constraining to memorize rote learnings and high disrepute. And rote learning at the peak is never, you just think what Boris Johnson did, either he was required to do it or he did it, was learn Greek well enough to read it and remember it and memorize long passages. he ends that long discourse with, "I could go on."
Yes.
Right. So what did he get for that? Did that make him a slave? Because that's the point. The point is, what we think in school now is that the purpose of learning is for you to figure out your own reality. And that means you can make up any one you want.
It's so inimical to actual education. We come back, we're going to talk about Joseph Sachs' Introduction to the Iliad. There are points relevant to this and to your life and our politics today. Don't go anywhere. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is on a Thursday this week, and what a Thursday it is as Brexit gets close to being a reality, or at least a hard Brexit if it all falls apart at the last minute. Boris Johnson reading the Iliad. We began talking about the Iliad last week at the Hillsdale Dialogue. My guest is Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Are your students obliged to memorize the Iliad or just study it, Dr. Arnn?
Everybody studies it. And, you know, I like to say standards are very high at Hillsdale College, and the core curriculum is very ambitious. But in the beginning, you had to know Latin and Greek to enter the college. So we have not matched that performance yet.
Okay, well, I want to go to Joe Sachs, the translation that you recommended to me, and I ordered the book up, and I of course left it behind, so I'm operating from memory, but there are some things that stand out from his introduction that I want to talk to you about. First of all, he urges early on in his introduction, scholars are wonderful, scholars are great, scholars help us understand, but read the poem. And this is, I don't know if he's a Straussian, which is a technical term for people who are listening. It's a particular approach to political theory, but that is something a Straussian would say. I've never been smart enough to be a Straussian, but I know that that's what they say. Is he a Straussian, and is that what he's saying?
Well, he was, he in this book and many of his books, he gives great credit for his understanding to a man named Jacob Klein, who was his colleague at St. John's and who was a friend and colleague of Leo Strauss for decades. So what Straussianism means in the general sense, there are controversies about what it means, but it means an attempt to recover the past as it was, and especially the past great thinkers, because the modern thinkers have gone crazy. And there's a humility about that, but you have to remember about Leo Strauss that he was a Jew, and his teacher among his teachers was Martin Heidegger, a great mind of the 20th century, who was a Nazi. And so Leo Strauss had to flee for his life from his teacher, and he decided to start over.
And to begin at the beginning, and I'm not sure if Strauss ever wrote about the Iliad, but here are a couple things I remember again from memory, because I don't have it in front of me. Joseph Sachs says, don't worry too much about dates. The Trojan War occurs around 1200 BC. Homer gets written down sometime in the 8th century in the 700s, and we don't need to know much other than that it lasted for 500 years without being reduced to writing, which means there were people who, like Boris Johnson, could repeat it again and again, and it's an epic poem. But this should not surprise us, Larry Arnn.
Yeah, and probably, so Sachs quotes a great scholar who set out, I can't remember the name of the man actually, in this introduction, and who set out to prove that the Iliad evolved, and that there are many versions of it, and it's greatly changed over the years, and many people contributed to it. And he reaches the conclusion that there was one singer in about 700 to 800 BC, and and the Iliad was taken down by dictation from him. And that means we're invited to think of this, and this is just a better way to read, whether it's true or not. We're invited to think of this as a work of art with a coherence to it. And the old debate about did Shakespeare write Shakespeare's plays, or Francis Bacon, or somebody else? And Professor Jaffa, my teacher, used to always say, well, it doesn't matter. Whoever did it was pretty good.
Yeah, he's right. Jaffa usually is. Now, the other thing I remember, and I think I'll probably carry this for the rest of my life, is that the Iliad is mostly about dying well, and that Achilles' death is not in the book, although it is the driving force, since he articulates that he's been given a choice. A long life or a short, glorious one with an epic death, and he chooses the former. He chooses the latter, but everybody around him dies, and most of them are described with great specificity. I'd never heard this before, that when there are a few groups of Trojans who are mowed down anonymously, people are shocked because Homer is trying to give every person the dignity of their own death. So this is really a book about dying well.
That's right. And Sachs culminates his review with the claim that the Iliad is about all of life, in fact, about all of nature, including the divine. And the people are named, the soldiers are named. The one shining exception, by the way, is when Achilles finally turns his wrath loose and kills many, many Trojans, and they are unnamed. And that's different from the typical thing, whereas when Homer starts to tell that somebody stabbed somebody, you have to go back to the homes of both those people and to learn about how they grew up and what their excellences were and what their armor was like and all that, right? And that's because you're to mourn. You're to revel in their feats, and you're to mourn the losses. And even the bravest of the soldiers, even Achilles' great choice is the choice we all face, and that is, shall we live well or shall we live a long time? And those are not necessarily incompatible, but in matters of courage, they very much can be. And so, and Achilles is not like Hector, the Trojan hero. Hector is afraid of something. He actually runs from Achilles, but it's not really Achilles so much he's afraid of. He's afraid of shame. Achilles is not afraid of that. Achilles is beyond shame. But Achilles is afraid that he won't find a death glorious enough, and that cutting off his life, he says once, Sachs quotes him, nothing matters so much as my life. He's the archetypal man from a certain point of view, right? He's not. There are no philosophers in this in the Iliad except maybe Homer, and the whole Iliad might be a philosophic work, but from the point of view of an active man, Achilles is the archetype and of the whole thing. And the point is, he is torn because, and it's also important that Achilles' mother is a goddess, Thetis, a sea god. And so he lives between the gods and men. And the whole Iliad, Sachs says, takes place on the boundary between the gods and the men. And so Achilles has this great choice. And I believe it's actually true that Achilles' rage or wrath that drives the whole plot of the Iliad, because Achilles first for a long time won't fight because of his rage or wrath, and then he does fight because of his rage and wrath, and after he fights successfully and banishes his enemy Hector, he still has a rage or wrath, and only at the end is that resolved. And so what is the cause of the rage or wrath? And that is this question he faces: what is the most divine thing for me, to continue to live or to find a great death? And he's torn by that.
There is also, and I struck by this again and again because of the coincidence of events, Attorney General William Barr went to Notre Dame last week, and he gave a speech about how secular absolutism is destroying the country. That's in a nutshell. He's not speaking on behalf of Christianity or Judaism or Islam or he's just saying secularism is destroying everything. This society cannot last unless it believes in God or gods, right? Unless it believes in a higher purpose and a higher divinity. And of course, that lines up perfectly with the Iliad, where the gods are omnipresent. It's the least secular book I think you could read.
Yeah. And see, these gods are, first of all, gods, part of Barth's point is, the idea of the divine or the perfect is necessary to make sense of the world as we see it, because we think some things are better than others. Whatever standard makes one thing better than another makes you look for the perfect example of that thing, or the perfection of that thing, and that just leads you up to God. That's what classic philosophy has much to do with. But then, if you give up on that idea, what you enter is actually what we're on our way to either brave new world, a pleasant society where life is completely unserious, or therefore human beings are truncated. They don't get to live their lives, and or to 1984, where those are the options, right? And
where you get to rage every day during a period of time certain. I'll be right back with Dr. Larry Arnn. We're going to talk about the gods and the fellow who makes the armor in just a moment. Don't go anywhere, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. And of course, I got to tell you about a few things over at HughHewitt.com. As I talked about in the first hour and the second hour, we need to back up Attorney General Barr's plea for religious liberty. We have to support the Alliance Defending Freedom right now. They provide free legal defense to clients who are battling that secular absolutism that Attorney General Barr talked about in that massively impressive and important speech. Your tax-deductible gift of $100, $1,000, or more right now will help keep the lawyers of the Alliance Defending Freedom protecting your freedom, providing the necessary resources to fight those battles at home. Please go to my homepage, HughHewitt.com, and the ADF banner's up there at the top. Or you can call toll-free 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060. There's also a lot of talk here in Washington, D.C. about health care, and my sponsor, Job Creator Network, wants you to know a few things. Progressive Democrats are making the big plans that you saw on Tuesday night. They are promising everything better and cheaper. They are saying it's going to be for free. The last time Democrats passed a big health care bill, we were promised we'd save $2,500 a year and keep our plans and our doctors. Remember that? It was called Obamacare, and it did not work out. The numbers do not lie. In 2019, 37% of the counties across the United States had access to only one health insurer as part of health care, quote, exchanges. Individual premiums they went up 123% since 2013, increasing more than 100%, 123% since 2013. Family premiums went up 174%. The reason is lobbyists, bureaucrats, and politicians are making the decisions that determine what kind of health care you get, not you. That's the bad news, but there's good news to report. There's a movement in this country to put you in charge of your health care. Healthcareforyou.com. Healthcareforyou.com. Go to healthcareforyou.com and share your story so we can share it with people all across this country. You should be in charge of your health care. After all, it's your money, your health care, and your health. Go to healthcareforyou.com and share your story. You know, very, very troubling times if you listen to Michael Oren in the first hour. If you're worried about international conflict, Birch Gold is the place to head. In 2008, the U.S. national debt was $10 trillion. It's now $22 trillion in 11 years. It's rising like a hockey stick. Birch Gold, though, gives you a place to put your money that is safe. Birch Gold has thousands of satisfied customers, including me, countless 5-star reviews, an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. You can contact them and get a free info kit on physical precious metals by going to birchgold.com/Hugh or texting the name Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. If you don't know how to text, ask your son or daughter or grandkids. Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. They will send you that 16-page kit on how gold and silver can protect your savings, how you can legally move your IRA or 401k out of stocks and bonds, at least in part, to precious metals. That's texting my name, Hugh, to 474747, or go to birchgold.com. And don't forget, relieffactor.com. Got to take some to Dr. Larry Arnn soon. I'm wearing him out this morning on Achilles. ReliefFactor.com, $19.95 get you started. I took in the first hour. I told you about it in the second hour. This is my last reminder of the day. ReliefFactor.com, ReliefFactor.com. Don't forget it. And if you don't have it, join the tens of thousands of people who take it every morning. 3 pills that help provide temporary support for the relief of minor pains and aches that come with aging and exercise. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, all of it for you. Go get your ReliefFactor.com and come right back for more of Dr. Arnn.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. Last segment of today's Thursday Hugh Hewitt Show. It's the Hillsdale Dialogue. It's early. Usually it's the last radio hour of the week. Today it's the last radio hour of Thursday. Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, is my guest. He turned me on a few weeks ago to Joseph Sachs' introduction to the Iliad, which we've talked about before and we'll talk about again. And Steve Smith and I talked about the poem itself last week, and we may be doing that again next week. But this introduction, Larry, I have never understood so much. Hephaestus, am I saying it correctly, the god Vulcan?
Yep.
Hephaestus makes armor for Achilles. It's never been revealed to me that he mourns having to do so until I read this introduction, because he knows it is to take away the sting of death, to make it glorious. And in fact, all of the gods are deeply kind of sympathetic characters in Sachs's view, except maybe Apollo. They mourn with men, they celebrate with women. They're just active in the life of every Greek, and I think that is the anti-secular world.
Well, it is, and these are gods of a specific kind and a very unusual kind, because they live just like us without all the trouble, and they quarrel only up to a point, because they know Zeus is the mightiest, and because they know what happened when the gods split and the Titans. My son-in-law was telling me last night that the original Titans, Kronos and such, they represent nature. And Zeus and Hera, his wife, and Apollo and Athena, those are the main ones, and Ares, who's very mean and always causing trouble killing people. Those ones represent a kind of civilization. They have a government among themselves and restraint among themselves. And on the other hand, they don't have any trouble in their lives. They can do whatever they want to do. And so they sort of both play with us, sport with us, and sympathize with us. And they directly affect and enter the battle often. And the whole plot of the thing, by the way, comes from two things. It comes from the interplay of, because everything comes from two things. There's always a human thing and there's always a divine thing. So the human thing that begins the thing and sets up the whole plot is Agamemnon, who's a pompous fool and a brave man, and Achilles have an argument. And Achilles gets into a wrath and won't join the battle. And then Athena, who loves Achilles and loves Athens, named for her and the Greeks, she makes a deal. She's very good with Zeus. She flutters her eyebrows at her eyelashes at her dad, and he'll do whatever she wants. You know how daughters are like. And so she says, "Let there be a great and terrible battle and slaughter, to be resolved only when Achilles finally takes the field." And so that's the reason for all this tragedy, is for the glory of Achilles in Athena's mind. And, other gods don't like that. They're partial to the Trojans, and Zeus goes back and forth. And so that's what makes it go. And then in detail, in every battle, at one point Diomedes, who's a great hero, and in these books that we're supposed to be reading this week, but we'll do them some other time, 4 through 7, Diomedes is a great warrior. After Achilles, the great Greek warriors are Diomedes and Ajax, greater Ajax. There are two Ajaxes. And Diomedes actually fights Apollo, and then Athena saves him because Apollo is very strong, but he actually manages to wound Ares. And so, the gods are immortal, and they're all powerful, except not quite.
Wow. It's actually fascinating, and I wonder if the Iliad is too hard for our modern education system to understand and grapple with because of stuff like, you always get the idea that ancient peoples relied on gods to explain their problems away. That is clearly not what's going on here. It's clearly telling you how to live.
Yeah. And see, if my earlier point is you are required by logic to imagine God or gods, because you need them to make sense of the universe. And these gods, their nature sets up a kind of conversation between the gods and men that let you compare the two modes of being, and then better to understand both. And because the gods are different and yet the same. And see, all in the theological cosmos of Homer, all human life ends in misery, great and small. Hades is just not a good place. And, there's lots of, they all know, all the Greeks, they know that they're going to end up there no matter what they do. And in some cases that tends to cowardice, few in the Iliad. And in some cases, that tends to boldness, right? I'm going to go anyway. Might as well go well.
Might as well go. And when we pick up next week, I hope with both you and Dean Smith, I think that would be fascinating, chapters 4 through 7, we will expand this forward. The Joseph Sachs introduction, well worth getting the book. Go look it up online. Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, thank you. What a conversation. Thank you, Boris Johnson, as well. More tomorrow, America. Thank you, Adam, Ben, and Dwayne on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network.